I mean, I think part of this is the SOI part, but the bulk of it's probably an LTP question. I mean, just to touch, I guess, on the how does what you measure and how you set targets affect strategic prioritisation, which I think is sort of where you're going to. You know, where you set a very challenging target, or where you set quite a soft target, or you say, we don't mind if it gets a bit worse on this thing, that's actually a really, really powerful tool for how you want a CCO to prioritise its work. So for years, we have set very, very aggressive public transport ridership targets for Auckland Transport. And almost every single SOI, we have said, no, we would like you to bump it up. You want to push it down, we want to bump it up. And we've done that because that was a very strong strategic approach that we've had ever since Auckland Council came into existence, that we really want to focus on that area. And I think that's been really, really successful. We've increased ridership by, you know, we're nearly reaching 90 million. We're probably at 60 million or something like that when Auckland Transport was formed. So through having very strategic approach to what we measure and what we set aggressive or less aggressive targets on, we can significantly influence where we want the CCO to really focus their efforts. And I think moving forward, it's how we make those key decisions about which are the things to set really strong stretch targets for, where we want the CCO to turn itself inside out and trying to achieve this thing. And even if they fail slightly, we'll actually give them a pat on the back and say, hey, we almost don't want you to easily achieve this target. We want you to try everything you can, but this is a really tough stretch target, versus ones we say we want to keep an eye on this, make sure it stays the same or doesn't go backwards too fast. I think that's kind of but that's more an LTP discussion rather than this year SOI, because I guess we're still measuring the same things as per the last LTP. But Josh, you were in the room before when we had with council investments, that some of those assumptions that we're making, so that the Mayor and the Chair of the Finance Committee can come back to us to frame the LTP questions, are relevant to a whole range of CCOs. So is there guidance that you can give us? I mean, I agree with you on stretch targets. I think it's better to aim for the moon and you know, you might get halfway than to be defeatist in your approach. But we need to bring that along with the points around financial sustainability and ensuring that we can get alternative, you know, it's bringing all of that into a package that actually gives the public accountability. This is not just Auckland Transport, this is just not Auckland Council. It is the public being able to see how we've come together and how we're framing it, that we can move forward. So those measurements are maybe ones that we can't see just in isolation to the individual CCOs. Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest, the most significant recommended change to the draft SOI is to tell the story in a much simpler and more easily understood way by the general public. I think that's the strongest flavour that... Well, it's been the biggest weakness of Auckland Transport. And I think that's, you know, the targets and measures are part of that story. It's also about, hey, look, out of the 700 million CapEx program, X percentage is going into these kinds of projects, these kinds of projects, these kinds of projects. You can clearly see where we are focusing our efforts, and it's, you know, to deliver these kinds of things. I think that's a point well made and picked up in those comments. Look, I'm keen to get through. We've got two more speakers to go on this, Mike Lee and then Leslie Simpson. We'll try and make progress and maybe get through the agenda before lunch.
I'll keep lunch in mind, Mr. Mayor. In terms of this statement of intent, in many respects, it's probably the most urgent and relevant for us right now. You wouldn't find it in here, but essentially, despite an enormous investment and expenditure in capital and operational funding over the last 6 years or so, Auckland is still not performing at the level of comparator cities in New Zealand or Australia. So I think we need to keep that in mind, because if you read this, it all looks pretty good. And in the chair's forward, it's very clear that if there's a failure or fall off in performance, it's due to not enough money. And I think we need to be a little bit sceptical about that. I have some questions. Given this document, for what it's worth, is to inform not just us, but everyone, I just am concerned about the legibility and the integrity, I guess, of the figures in here. I haven't obviously looked at all of them, but in terms of rail, for instance, rail income is considered to be, is stated to be 56 million in AT's financial report for the year 16-17. It was somewhat lower than that. The other aspect is the fare box return, which is something imposed on regional councils by the government to try and give it some confidence it's getting value for money, I guess. It's somewhat arbitrary, 50%, but then again, it's a stretch target and therefore useful. In the 2015-16, I see Auckland Transport are reporting a 51.2% actual. I would question that, and I believe that figure would have been reached by using commercial services that are not recipients of NZTA funding or government funding or ours, to use those numbers, the Devonport Ferry, Waiheke Ferry, the non-subsidised services, the airport shuttle, to change the ratio to make that figure look better, which, okay, that may make some people feel better, but it's not really giving good information. The NZTA fare box recovery ratio was to ensure that the subsidised services were achieving that, and so it's one thing to fool other people, another thing to fool oneself. So I think we need a little bit more checking around that.
We can check to ensure it's consistent with NZTA's definitions.
Yeah, and the last time I checked it was not, and but it seems to be a temptation to make that look good. I would like to know where in here is the intention to extend rail services to the Kumeu-Huapai area, which is under intense development right now and does have a railway line and does have a legacy plan to extend rail services there. I can't find that. I can't find anything in here about fare evasion, and anyone who knows anything about rail in Auckland knows that fare evasion is still chronic, and I think that needs to be addressed. The other metric which is studiously avoided, and I referred to it earlier, is per capita use. That is a metric in which Auckland can compare its performance and the money it is putting in to other cities. Wellington does it, the other comparator cities across the Tasman do it, and it's a very useful benchmark. It's one that Auckland Transport doesn't like to use, but as a shareholder we should make them use it, and then we can all have a reality check on what we're getting for all the money we are pouring in. And relatively speaking, I believe we are putting in significant funding and have been. In terms of the stretch targets, I noted Mr. Arbery's comments. Yes, I recall there was something of a crisis between the council and Auckland Transport a few years ago, when I think it was the Transport Committee, or was it the Infrastructure Committee, upheld quite aggressive targets, and Auckland Transport balked at it. The Mayor of the day supported our stand, and yes, rather than breaking the organisation, as the Chair of AT warned us, the targets were achieved relatively easily. And I think in terms of targets, I think we need to bear in mind the targets we had from the Auckland Plan, which I think is 120 million by 2022. Mr Arbery will recall that. That is a useful stretch target to keep in front of Auckland Transport. One more point, that is other financial information, current value of assets, and it's got here 17,500 million. Is that seems a little bit under when you take into account the value of the rolling stock, the stations, ferry wharves, fibre optics, all those capital assets. So what is that 17,500 million? Is that it's on page 89 of the agenda. The figures need to be need to stand up to scrutiny and to comparisons with figures used in other documents if they are to engender confidence. I'll leave it at that.
Any comments on any of those points that officials would like to make?
I mean, I think we can double check the numbers. I mean, part of the simplification story is obviously the tables where legislatively required need to be there, but there also needs to be a financial or an investment story that council's making in Auckland Transport that needs to be more easily understood, and we need to ensure that the numbers are right. I think that's probably the key.
The fare evasion?
We can, I mean, I know Auckland Transport has a number of activities to try and combat that. It's gating a number of additional stations in the coming year. That could be captured as part of the work program, I suppose. And that's quite a significant investment to gate a station. So we'll have a chat with them and just see how we bring that in.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Until Councillor Fletcher just brought that up, that wasn't actually on my list, but I will say that I have spoken to a train person, what do you call them?
Train manager?
Manager, that said that fare evasion is huge, and if you gate one, they just keep going a little bit further and get on the next one. Yeah, so I think that's a very, very, very valid point. Look, I'm going to keep it quite, you know, I want to eat like everybody else. So I just think, I listened to the public forum person, and I just want to highlight again, Auckland Transport just has to have a commitment to address congestion and help Aucklanders move through its region more efficiently than they currently do. It's that simple for me. And I think at the end of the day, Auckland Transport is probably the bane of most Aucklanders' lives. It affects them, you know, whether they are able to park where they want to park, if a car mode is their way of going, if they want to catch a bus or, you know, can't move because the transport solution isn't there. I think the communication, I understand our discussions, and Chris, Councillor Darby, I'm really keen. I don't know that all your points, they're actually up on the screen, so I'm very keen for what you've put together to be included, definitely, and Councillor Hills as well. I just think that of all our CCOs, this one, from a communications perspective to Aucklanders, needs to be the one that we get right. That's just my comment. I support what everyone's saying, and I think we're going to try and tighten this up considerably. But when we go back to Auckland and say, look, we are committing significant money of yours into Auckland Transport so that we can move through the region more efficiently, and this is how we have said we want Auckland Transport to address that. So I think that's a really powerful, you know, a comms around this is incredibly important.
Thank you very much. That item had more speakers than any other, which backs up the...
I have a question on behalf of Councillor Casey, because she is not here.
Okay.
And that is on the issue of crossings, rail crossings.
Level
and
crossings.
Level crossings. Whether you feel that we have actually captured that. It's obviously for signing off with the Mayor, but it needs to be recorded as an issue.
We'll have a think about that. I mean, the best way of addressing that. So there is a major program that was included in ATAP of level crossing removals, and I guess it's just at what point is the money available to start picking those off.
And can you take it back to Councillor Cooper's question around partnerships? I'm sure there's a better way of doing it than we're doing it at the moment.
Okay, let's look at Panuku. Some initial comments.
Can I have answers in due course for those questions I raised, Mr Mayor?
Yep,
Thank
sure.
you.
If we can make sure that the councillor gets a response on the issues, I've got a note, but I'm sure you have as well.
Sure. The comments on Panuku begin with just a request for them to clarify exactly in their statement of intent what their role is, because they drift a little bit in some of the wording into describing themselves as an urban development agency, which is a slightly separate concept from their role as a regeneration agency at the moment. A second comment is to ensure that they're aligning with central government capital planning wherever possible, especially in the transform and unlock areas. There's a corresponding statement to the one that's in Auckland Transport's draft statement of intent about working together with Auckland Transport, and we've already covered that a little bit, so we can look at strengthening that if need be. And finally, the comment around more explanation of some of their targets as well, just to be clear of what's going on.
Thank you. Any questions? Denise Lee.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. It's just really carrying on my earlier point from the Auckland Transport section about paragraph 44 and whether we need to, not just in Auckland Transport and Panuku, but Watercare as well, possibly other CCOs, just an undergirding of that transform and unlock areas, if we're going to back ourselves for that, and agree with how you're wanting to sort of not play with, but amend some of the wording around Panuku's lead agency status. But it should be an expectation from us across other CCOs that is acknowledged and has a bit of teeth to it, and not just Panuku's statement of intent. Look, I'll just leave it there, but otherwise agree with your comments in terms of waiting. Deleting the comments in regards to the government's Urban Development Authority legislation. I think you've got there, you want to delete part of it, but just retention of providing that it just could provide additional powers to Panuku. So there's still reference to the government's legislation, rather than, so you're not suggesting to delete all of it. Can you just clarify that? That bit, you've got it in paragraph 41 of our report.
Yes, I agree with how you're suggesting we characterise it. There should still be reference to the UDA process that's going on, but just not state a particular organisational position on that process, and because that's subject to a council decision that hasn't been made yet.
Yeah, coming to planning committee. Okay, great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Clow.
I would have thought 43 they're doing that. We're asking them to investigate. I mean, I know with working with Panuku, with Avondale and that they are working with Housing New Zealand. They are working with the Hobsonville Land Company, and to be quite honest, I'd be a bit damn horrified if we found they weren't doing that in a significant way in all the major areas. So my question there is, do we really need to ask them to investigate that? Maybe they just need to inform us of what they're doing rather than investigating, because if they're not doing that, that's horrifying.
I think that's probably a fair comment, Councillor. We could probably change the wording to something along the lines of make a commitment to continue to ensure that they're aligning the capital planning with their work.
Now, I know they are coming back to us with some papers, a paper on recommendations to optimise the land in the in the unlock category as well as the transform, and they're going to come back and really suggest that they need to have the authority, like they do at Onehunga and Manukau, to keep all the land sales within that area to go about the developments which could be purchasing and developing within that area. So we really need them to come back to help to inform the LTP about the disposal targets, because if you remember, that was really the only goal that Auckland Council property effectively had in reality, was to actually sell land and contribute up to, we wanted 600 million over 10 years, which was really just a gap in our LTP that we just identified. We said, right, go out and raise it because we're short of that. Now, there's not a lot of science involved in how it was done, and they're clearly falling a little bit behind on the target. I think they're at about 250 now, which is pretty good, but it's getting harder and harder. So we need them to come back and give us a very accurate synopsis going forward for the LTP, because there's a big gap there in our LTP, and it could end up a couple of $100 million short, which is again another couple of $100 million on basically deficit, infrastructure deficit that we've got. And I think aligned to that, they need to be telling us how things are going with Auckland Transport's regards disposals as well, because Auckland Transport, in fairness, are getting harder and harder again to agreeing to dispose land for us, because they want to hold everything, and of course they do need to hold quite a bit. But I think we need to be getting them to come back with some pretty serious analysis of going forward.
Any comment on that? Some of that will obviously come up under LTP, particularly the meeting of the target. But
I mean, just to clarify, is it something similar to what we're doing with Auckland Council Investments Limited, just seeking them to provide us advice in the future, later this year?
Yeah, but the disposal side of things, I mean, it's very, if you look on page 96, I mean, it's one word at the end of point number 4 of the 4 broad areas that they're supposed to focus on, but it's something that really all councillors need to be better informed of, and to think more seriously about the consequences of voting against land disposal, or on the other side buying extra land for parks or etc. when we don't need to do that. It's a real big thing that a lot of people seem to think, okay, 2 million here, extra spend, so what? We've got 600 million in the budget or something like that. So these are big funding gaps that we're potentially going to have to somehow bring together, and I don't know how we can do that. It's a worry.
Yeah, I think in the Auckland Transport comments, we've asked for a commitment from Auckland Transport to a joint review of their property portfolio with Panuku to identify surplus assets for sale. I guess a more general comment would be that it's also a challenge for the entire council group, not just Transport and Panuku, to identify assets that aren't core to our business.
But then we sell land like we did on Dominion Road that have been acquired for light rail, and now when we go to buy it back, it's going to be 20 times the amount. So, I mean, you've got to go through it really carefully.
I think having some of the principles behind the disposal of land and the ability to meet targets would be useful in terms of the statement of intent, if we can fit that in.
Yeah,
we need to know the criteria. Obviously, we don't want to dispose of land that may be important for corridors or may be important for public open space. And equally, we don't want to hold on to land that isn't relevant to either of those purposes, but could be realised. But maybe something in the statement of intent about the criteria they're following and their ability to meet the target, I think, was Councillor Close.
Yes, and that will be an LTP discussion, because aside from the existing target that there currently is, there will be issues as Panuku comes to you with business cases for transformer unlock areas where, like you say, Councillor Clow, they want to reinvest those sale proceeds from that area back into that development project, which will have an impact on their overall ability to meet the other sales targets. So that should be a very serious topic of discussion in the LTP.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, Mr Mayor, I recognise that this is probably a comment more for the LTP, and it's been confirmed by the officials, and I just wanted to support the comments by Councillor Clow around the sale of property or sale of assets, and I think through the LTP we need to recognise that there needs to be an incentive for the local boards to actually get on board with the disposal of properties, because in many cases the local boards are the ones who don't get anything out of any sales.
That's right.
And are then holding up the process because they don't want to sell. So I think in the LTP, through the LTP process, what we need to do is to find some kind of incentive which will help grease that wheel, getting the local boards to make some positive decisions around selling. There's nothing in it for them at the moment. Exactly. That's the problem. And that's why we need some incentives.
Thank you. Take that point on board. Councillor Newman.
Yeah, it kind of follows on with the topic that Councillor Quacks has just raised. I mean, and it goes back to, I think I'm just reiterating the point that I mentioned before around the disposal of land process when we've got spatial priority area work streams underway. There are some important land holdings in some of these SPA locations, and but notwithstanding the fact that we are currently undertaking community engagement, having developed principles and work streams for the spatial priority areas, we also have the disposal work stream going on, and so I don't quite know how you can reconcile all of that, Your Worship, given that Councillor Clow has pointed out there's a need to achieve targets that are assisted by the disposal of land and freeing up capital, but at the same time, if we are true to achieving some of these development outcomes through the spatial priority area process, then some of these disposals are not necessarily helpful to achieving the aspirations that I assume the council has mandated when we identified the spatial priority areas previously. So maybe the staff could give clarity around that, because I'm utterly confused as to what our core objective is. Is it to realise capital through disposal of land, or is it to achieve good outcomes in these areas that have been identified as a priority for us? And Panuku's role in achieving those things.
Thank you. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points on this one. Page 101 of the agenda, up the top there, point 1 in the urban development category, there's a reference to framework plans. This concerns me when there is a use of the period 20 to 25 year period. It seems really odd. It's a bit like government's decision to give us light rail in 2047, which is pretty much, there's no plan to do so. So 2025 for me is too far out. I thought a framework plan should be really 0 to 10 years. We don't have the explanation right here now, but that is a totally inappropriate forecast for implementation. So I think we need to get some explanation from them, why they've got that number 2025, why isn't it 0 to 10? Because I think that's focusing on, say, Manukau, Onehunga, Northcote and the other unlocks, and I think there's community expectation that we do it way shorter than up to 25 years. The other point is there was some contention that the UDA reference should be taken out. I take a different view. I actually think they've signalled it here for discussion through our policy decisions and possibly LTP, will be LTP. I prefer to take another route on this, Mr Mayor, and retain it, but caveat it with, you know, being subject to the CCO seeking policy endorsement of the council.
Yeah, I guess it's a question of cart before the horse. That may well be the direction we go in, but we can't put it in a statement of intent till we've made the decision ourselves. That's the difficulty. But comments from officials on actually on both of those points, the framework plan and the appropriate time frame for that.
Just on the framework plan, I think my discussions with Panuku, that's based largely around the work that they've been doing down on the waterfront in Wynyard, and that they see that as a 20 to 25 year project, and they're sort of extrapolating that to other areas that they've become involved in. Whether that's appropriate, I think you're right, we need to have a discussion with them and for them to justify that time frame. Sorry, I've forgotten the second question.
The UDA and the reference we can make to that, given that Council hasn't actually yet formulated its submission to central government on that, but is in the process, officials are in the process of doing a draft, as I understand it.
Yes, and I guess that's the basis for our proposed comment there, was that until Council has actually formalised what its position is on it, and until the government actually passes whatever legislation is required, that it's a bit cart before the horse to be saying that they will be that. Look, I'm relatively relaxed either which way, because they can't go claiming to be a UDA until the government makes decisions we tell them to be, but we're happy to take guidance from you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. Let's move on. The next one is Regional Facilities Auckland.
Through the Chair, just briefly, that point of the 2020, why don't we just say the next 25-year period, because they are taking the long-term view when it comes to Wynyard Quarter, Manukau and Onehunga, but Northcote, Avondale and a few others, they're aiming to do it in the next 5 years, 3 to 5 years.
You're talking about the framework plan here?
Yeah,
let's seek clarification about that. It's an interesting point that Councillor Darby's made. Let's see why they've chosen those particular time frames, because they may not be appropriate over the wider range of activities. But until we know what's in their mind, we might have difficulty in reformulating it. Okay, we're looking at Regional Facilities Auckland. Edward.
The key focus of our comments about Regional Facilities Auckland's draft statement of intent are essentially presentational issues to provide greater clarity for the public about what RFA is planning to do over the next 3 years. Namely, what we want is a clearer link between the strategic objectives section and the projects that they are proposing to deliver those objectives. A greater level of detail about the cost of services to different parts of their business, and just in general terms, so that the public can see what gets spent on the art gallery or the zoo and so on. And additional explanation of some of the targets that they've set, because some of them do look like they're going down, but there are reasons that underlie that, is my understanding. And the final point is just to get a greater commitment from RFA about collaborating across the council group to explore opportunities for good outcomes. Thank you.
Right, RFA. Any questions from councillors on that? Won't hesitate too long unless somebody has a pressing issue. Councillor Simpson.
So just on RFA, and it's across the council family, so a real clarity around, something like events, because RFA do events, Auckland Council do events, ATEED do events, and potentially how they can work together more to have some efficiencies around that space. Mm-hmm.
Some do events all on their own, like Eden Park Trust Board, so it's
maybe
a more contentious issue.
But just, working together, I think, across the family, potentially for efficiency.
It may be useful to have something in the document that asks them to clarify their relationships with other CCOs.
Yes, and there is a comment in the second bullet point of paragraph 49
I see that.
That refers both to Panuku and to ATEED in the event space.
And we'll take some other steps before we intrude Eden Park Trust Board into that. Okay, no other questions? Councillor Darby, Councillor Cooper.
With your goodwill, can I just back the bus up? Just one, I forgot to mention one of my notes on Panuku. It's very brief.
Yep, sure.
And it relates to paragraph 44. Paragraph 44, I think, is too limiting. Mr. Mayor, one of the problems I think we have at the moment is AT goes out, does its job well in designating and then using Public Works Act for infrastructure, say the City Rail Link, but it doesn't do it mindful of what the regeneration opportunity is. And then Panuku gets transferred the land for that, to create that opportunity. Now, the ideal way is for AT to work with Panuku at the outset when it acquires land to ensure that you acquire the appropriate land that would deliver good regeneration opportunity. So I think I would prefer that to be not as limited as it is there, just focusing on transform and unlock areas. I think there's greater opportunity for Panuku going forward to work with Auckland Transport in the acquisition of land necessary for transport infrastructure to ensure regeneration opportunity is safeguarded, something like that.
I think that's actually true when you think about some of the issues we've been dealing with, such as around Panmure and potentially around the new Mount Eden station. Is there any objection to putting that in? I think that would be a positive inclusion.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cooper.
I'm going back to RFA. I mean, I think for me, it's clear RFA don't really do events. They look after the places where events happen. And I think that's where the confusion comes, but which often AT might promote. So that is the confusion, but I'm not confused. My concern is around actually they hold buildings on our behalf, and they have to come basically beg us for money to keep those buildings of a good standard. So I want to see something around our relationship with them, or them at least really clear about what their role is around maintaining our buildings. Because properties do some stuff, but they look after these buildings, and we're not actually giving them enough money to look after our own assets. So I want to see some sort of statement somewhere around what they're going to do, but also we need to be able to respond to that to say, well, how are we going to help them do that? Because they already earn an awful lot of money for the council, and we're going to be putting another burden on them in terms of wages, and that may cut into their ability to look after our buildings. So I want to be able to have it clearly spelled out, or somehow, I don't know who it's coming from, because the reality is we're imposing some stuff on them that makes it more difficult to do their job. How do we get them to show how they're going to maintain our assets, but at the same time have some sort of, we have some sort of obligation to them to not make that more difficult? I don't know how you put that in there, but I think that's going to be a big issue for us. We're giving money to other organisations to build buildings, $10 million here, $15 million there, $3 million there, but we're strangling our own organisation's ability to look after our own assets.
And they're getting older.
And so I don't know how we can't ask them to do stuff if we hobble them. So, yeah, you might be able to help me on that one.
Well, I think for all the reasons you've just said, that's a discussion for the annual plan and LTP process, because it essentially comes down to what standard do you as a council want those buildings maintained to, and how much money are you prepared to invest
Put
in?
into it, yeah.
Yeah,
But that's true of all the CCOs, Auckland Transport. You can't put in a letter of expectation if you don't give them the funding to deliver it.
Exactly.
Everyone has assets.
Yep, okay, just wanted that out
It's
there,
a-
because
it's
I
a
do
good
think
point.
it's quite a difficult thing when we're giving, we can't be giving money away to other organisations to do the very same thing that we won't do for our own assets, but I don't know how.
There are some other issues that come out of that, forward planning, for example, of spending intentions at Western Springs if they develop it as a world standard a cricket ground consistent with international requirements. But those decisions haven't yet reached conclusion, so it's a little hard for them to explain, even though it may happen in the immediate future, what their spending intentions and what the demand on additional funding might be. Obviously there are limitations on how much council could fund, but it may be that it's a little premature to put some of those issues into this report at this point.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm talking about current maintenance. I'm not even talking about new developments.
Yeah.
So,
But
I mean,
both
that's
issues.
still in discussion, but I think that they definitely have a mandate to maintain the buildings that they manage on our behalf. Not even talking about the new stuff, but I think, yeah, as Alistair says, that's a conversation for the LTP, but I know that that board is very exercised with that. We just have to look out the window of where we are now at 1 through 5 and see the AOTS Centre and what a terrible state it is in, and we've not, this council has not really put aside money, and that's supposed to be a really important building in this city on a very significant public square, and we've not given them enough money to do anything with it. We've given it to somebody else, the other end of town.
I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think they have built in a budget for upgrading the AOTS Centre.
It's not enough.
Yeah.
And it's got leaky building issues.
It's pretty significant, actually.
It's quite a lot of money, but
Well, hopefully we give it to
this is this an issue that needs to be better addressed within the statement of intent?
Yeah, look.
Both issues
Is it an
actually.
LTP?
New facilities
is it
and
purely an LTP
maintaining
issue?
existing,
Yeah.
or is it LTP?
I think
Dominantly.
I'd suggest this is a discussion in the LTP,
Okay,
because
thank
even
you.
do they have enough funding to maintain their assets as they currently stand is a funding discussion.
Okay,
Thank
I
you.
think we'll leave it to that. Okay, let's move on to the last of the big CCOs, water care. Edward.
The comments about water care focus on the importance of...
Last one.
Sorry, just I might have overlooked Councillor Clow. You wanted to comment on RFA?
It's just, you've got RFA and we've, stadium strategies, but continually the elephant in the room is Eden Park. That's, excuse me, the elephant in the room is Eden Park. It just seems to be always out there, being squished out of our fingers, and it's not really brought into any formal proposals. And I know it's a separate entity, but we've got a stake in that as well, and that is the issue going forward. I mean, and it is at the heart of the whole, RFA strategy, really, even though it's not part of the family.
Yeah.
But then we are guaranteeing $50 million.
It is an issue. We have got a guarantee of 40 million, which may be problematic, and we have a loan of 6 million, and we have Eden Park not able to meet its depreciation requirements, which is probably 8 or 9 million a year. They are currently outside the RFA, so we can't deal with this under the RFA, but we may be looking at, in fact, almost certainly be looking at that as part of the long-term plan because of the requirements imposed on us. Currently, we don't appoint the directors of Eden Park either, so they are not they're not controlled by us, but they may well become a cost to us. Anyway, I think if we can move on to water care now.
Yes, thank you. The comments around water care fall into two areas. One is really around reiterating the need for water care to align with and collaborate with council in a greater way. The first example of that is really around the importance of water care committing to aligning its growth strategy with councils through things like the FULS, the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, providing more clarity of priority projects and their relative importance and how those priorities again link with the council's growth strategy. And the third point is around supporting a Three Waters review or strategy as that process develops. The second set of comments are really around things like the public presentation, if you like, around things like demand management and what we're doing around climate change resilience, and just providing more information so that the public can see what's going on, especially in the context of recent weather events.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we focus on resilience. Watercare are currently doing a review of the events of Cyclone Debbie, if that's the right one. So many cyclones, I can't remember which.
She was a baddie.
The first of the weather bombs, and so they'll be reporting through that. But it could well be strengthened, I think, within the statement of intent, particularly with the likelihood, as we've just witnessed, of a greater occurrence of extreme weather events. But are there other comments? Councillor Holtz.
Thank you. I think the comments in the report are excellent. I just want to make a very small point, thinking about recent water infrastructure in Aotearoa. We've just got a gap that we need to fill somewhere, and I know it's referred to in the governance manual about the relationship between the governing body and Watercare, but I'd like to see us pick that up in here under engaging with our communities. In the first instance, Watercare must engage with the governing body on these critical issues that will be of concern or importance to local communities. I don't want to wordsmith the issues, but there's just a fundamental gap between Watercare and their understanding of their relationship with us. They might not be funded by rates, but it doesn't mean that they're an independent company and a law unto themselves. I want to acknowledge our new chair of Watercare, who I think understands this very, very well and is doing a sterling job, but I think we need to embed culture change every step of the way. So when you've got a big, difficult thing to do, come and talk to us first. I'm sure there'll be the right words, Mr. Mayor, that are a little bit more formal than that.
Okay, I think we all know what you're talking about, Councillor.
They've had a few emails to prove it.
And we, that is, I think there have been some lessons learned, but maybe we can build that more into our statement of intent. Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to get a bit of a clarification on what is meant by better narrative around demand management.
What I'm seeking there is just greater explanation of the things that Watercare already are doing to manage demand better, and the things that they are exploring to continue to improve the efficiency with which Auckland has used water.
Okay, would that include pricing? Clearly, that's going to be the biggest driver of demand.
I think that was up to Watercare to include whatever actions they're taking, but I assume that includes elements to do with ensuring pricing is appropriate.
Can we be a bit more clear on that?
I'm sorry, Councillor, what's
Be a bit more clear on that, do you think?
Yes, we could give Watercare more explanation what we mean by that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's a fair question. Councillor Darby.
Thank you. Probably 3 points here. Thanks for mentioning the Three Waters strategy review. I'm just wondering, though, whether it's clear in your words that we are expecting a review of the 2008 Three Waters strategy document, because we lead in with a commitment to actively support council's value for money, etc., and then it doesn't get to the nub of it, which is we expect Auckland Watercare to undertake a review of the Three Waters strategy of 08. And I'm just not sure whether it's clear. And thank you also over the page, something Councillor Hulse and myself have been beating the drum on water demand management since 1886. And I'm encouraged to see that there, but what I don't see in their words is it almost looks like just a soft update as opposed to a review. The data inputs that the earlier water demand management plan are based on 2004 data inputs, and that's light years gone. So I think we need to convey that we're actually expecting a much more innovative water demand management plan, full stop. And it probably should reflect the need for an emergency incident water demand management plan as part of it, because the recent siltation events demonstrated to me that there is no emergency water demand management plan. So they're probably my 2 points there. They are covered, but I'm probably just asking them to be fleshed up a bit.
Okay, that's reasonably clear, I think.
Yes.
We've got two more. I'll take
my hand up as well.
Oh, three more. Well, in which case, I'll just need an indication from councillors. We have, after water care, we've got 3 small CCOs. It won't take much time, but we also have one other significant item on the agenda. Is it the mood of councillors you want to break for lunch at the end of water care and come back in half an hour, or would you rather complete the agenda?
Complete the agenda.
Complete the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll need a resolution that we continue. I'll move in that way. All those, seconder, please.
Yes.
Yep. All those in favour, please say aye. To the contrary, no. Carried.